Fora TV. The world is thinking.
Good evening. Let me welcome you. Our friends are equipped with their microphones. My name is Bill Kelly. I'm the president of the CUNY Graduate Center. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the first event of this year's Great Issues Forum. The forum, as many of you know, is a central element of the Graduate Center's public programming. It's funded by the Carnegie Corporation of New York and by the Leopold Gellert Family Charitable Trust, the Winston Foundation, and the Vital Projects Fund. We're very grateful for the support of those generous friends. Each year, the forum seeks to explore critical issues of our day through a single thematic lens. Last year, we focused on power and welcomed a wide range of eminent speakers, including Tom Stoppard, Derek Walcott, Nicholas Kristof, Zbigniew Brzezinski, Mary Robinson, Joseph Stiglitz, and Naomi Klein. This year, the Great Issues Forum's theme is religion. In a series of conversations involving prominent religious leaders, scientists, philosophers, we will examine fundamental questions about the nature of religion and of secularity. Fall programs will explore the future of religion in the light of its evolutionary past. In the spring, our focus will be directed toward Islam. Many of our events, including this evening's, are filmed and included on our website at greatissuesforum.org. We invite you to visit that venue. I'd now like to introduce this evening's distinguished panelists, and distinguished they are. Daniel C. Dennett, his university professor, and Austin B. Fletcher, professor of philosophy and co-director of the Center for Cognitive Studies at Tufts University. One of the world's most influential philosophers, Professor Dennett is best known for his argument that human consciousness and free will proceed from physical processes in the brain. He is a recipient of 2 Guggenheim Fellowships, a Fulbright Award, and a fellowship at the Center for Advanced Studies in Behavioral Science. He was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 1987. A prolific scholar, Professor Dennett's books include, as I'm sure most of you know, The Mind's Eye, Consciousness Explained, Darwin's Dangerous Idea, and Breaking the Spell, Religion as a Natural Phenomenon. John Hott is currently senior research fellow at the Woodstock Theological Center at Georgetown University, where he is formerly chair and professor in the Department of Theology. His area of specialization is systematic theology, with a particular interest in issues pertaining to science, cosmology, evolution, ecology, and religion. His many books include Is Nature Enough? Meaning and Truth in the Age of Science, God After Darwin, The Theology of Evolution, and Making Sense of Evolution, Darwin, God, and the Drama of Life, which is forthcoming in 2010. In addition to his many books, Professor Hott is the author of numerous essays and reviews. In 2002, he was the winner of the Owen Garrigan Award in Science and Religion. In 2004, he received the Sophia Award for Theological Excellence. In 2008, he was given a Friend of Darwin Award. Man, how great would that be to receive a Friend of Darwin Award by the National Center for Science Education. In 2009, in recognition of his work on theology and science, he was awarded an honorary degree by the University of Louvain, one of the great universities of the world, one of my favorite places in the world. Gustav Niebuhr, our moderator for this evening, and we're so grateful to him for taking on this task, pleasurable as it promises to be, is Associate Professor of Religion and the Media at Syracuse. He is based in the Newhouse School of Public Communications and has an appointment in the College of Arts and Sciences Religion Department. He is director of the Religion and Society Program and founding director of the Carnegie Religion and Media Program. In 2002-2003, he was scholar in residence at Princeton University's Center for the Study of Religion. Previously worked as a reporter at the Times, earlier than that at the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. He is the author of Beyond Tolerance, Searching for Interfaith Understanding in America. He is, and I think most of you probably know this as well, a regular contributor to the On Faith blog at WashingtonPost.com and at Newsweek.com. David Sloan Wilson is Distinguished Professor of Biology and Anthropology at Binghamton University, where he directs EVOS, a campus-wide evolutionary studies program. He's widely recognized as a champion of multi-level selection, theoretical perspective with deep implications for everything from the origin of life to the nature of religion. His books include Darwin's Cathedral, Evolution, Religion, and the Nature of Society, and Evolution for Everyone, How Darwin's Theory Can Change the Way We Think About Our Lives. His forthcoming book is titled Evolving the City. An evolutionist contemplates changing the world one city at a time. I just learned that evolving the city is one interest, revolving in the city another. Professor Wilson explained that he spent the afternoon ice skating at Bryant Park. I was delighted by that choice of activity in the afternoon. I'm thrilled to be in the room with these gentlemen, and I'm anxious to hear their conversation. So with no further ado, Professor Niebuhr, the floor is yours. Thank you all for being with us this evening.
Well, thank you very much, President Kelly, for that welcome. Good evening, gentlemen. Good evening to the audience. We have a vast topic tonight and a relatively short amount of time. Let me tell you in brief what I will do. I have a series of rather broad and open-ended questions which I will put to our panelists, naming an individual one to go first. But before that, it's been my experience as a journalist, a former journalist, that it is useful if we lay out and describe to the best of our ability certain essential terms. It never hurts, I think, to state the obvious, just so that we're all clear in one way or another about some of the ideas with which we'll be dealing. And so I'm going to ask each one of our panelists tonight no more than 3 minutes just to take on a topic and give it a definition. Let me start with Dr. Wilson and ask if you would speak to natural selection.
I wrote some comments down to be concise in my 3 minutes. So natural selection is like a recipe with 3 ingredients. We begin with differences. That's ingredient number 1. Those differences need to make a difference in terms of survival and reproduction. That's ingredient number 2. And then the third ingredient is heritability, offspring resembling their parents. And that's like a yeast that makes the recipe come to life. The outcome is adaptations, traits that enable organisms to survive and reproduce in their environments. And 2 additional points will get us to the study of religion. First, natural selection is a multi-level process so that groups can become adapted to their environments when certain conditions are met, in addition to individuals. And secondly, evolution takes place at the cultural level in addition to the genetic level. So there can be cultural evolution in addition to genetic evolution. And so when we put all these things together, we have a powerful framework for thinking about religion from an evolutionary perspective. And this perspective gives us not 1, but 6 different plausible conceptions of religion. A given element of religion can be an adaptation or not. If it is an adaptation, it could be good for the group, good for the individual compared to other individuals within the same group, or good for the cultural trait without being good for either individuals or groups. If it's not an adaptation, it might have been adaptive in the past, but not present environments. It could be a byproduct of another adaptation, or it could be just plain neutral. In other words, a difference that doesn't make a difference. And so the challenge for the evolutionist studying religion is to figure out which of these major hypotheses, or which combination, explains any given element of religion.
Thank you, and I think that's an example of what one can do in 3 minutes. Dr. Hott, what might the term religion mean?
Someone once compared this formal theoretical study of religion to ants crawling around on the outside of a goldfish bowl, making measurements of the fish and charting its movements and so forth, and being very clever about all that, but not having the slightest idea about what it's like to be a fish inside the fish bowl. And I think in many ways the scientific study of, not only the scientific study of religion, but also the theological study of religion is like that in a sense. It's not really going to tell us too much about what is concretely going on in there. Nevertheless, let me try anyway to give a very fragmentary and unsatisfactory description. I hesitate to use the word definition. But I understand religions to be the most important ways in which human beings on our planet for the last 50,000 years or so at least have sought reassurance in the face of fate, the experience that they're not in control of their lives, of death, of having to die, of the feeling of shame, guilt, and even self-rejection that comes from living in the context of community where things are expected of you and you never live up to them. But above all, perhaps, religion has been an attempt to find reassurance in the face of the threat of meaninglessness to people's existence. And I think people have, in general, found the reassurance that they're looking for in the experience of being grasped by or carried away by what they have taken to be another dimension of reality, other than the profane, other than the mundane, other than the proximate environment that they live in. There's an ultimate environment that's infinite in scope and inexhaustible in its mysteriousness. And they've made reference to this dimension primarily through symbolic expression. For example, early in the history of religion, the luminosity of bright sunshine, the purifying power of clean water and fresh air, and the fertility of soil and life. Experiences such as these gave people a kind of transparency, a sense of how the divine would influence their lives. And I should add that the symbolic way is not the only way into this mystery. There's also, as religion has developed, a mystical way, the way of silence, and the way of action as well, especially those four ways. And I should add that religion is also done usually in community with others. And it's accompanied by rituals, storytelling, dancing, all sorts of other human actions, art, etc. So it's a very complex thing. But above all, especially in terms of a conversation on science and religion, I'd want to emphasize the sense that there's some other dimension that's not empirically available, but yet is to the religious person even more real than what is empirically available.
Thank you. Thank you. Now I turn to Dr. Dennett to ask the question that I suspect quite a number of you may have brought with you this evening, and that is whether there is necessarily a conflict between religion and science.
I think if you look at the history of science and religion, you see where the conflict starts right at the beginning because if we look back, if we look, for instance, today at hunter-gatherer societies, that sort of traditional societies of that sort, what we see is that they don't make a distinction between science and religion. There's what everybody knows as far as they're concerned, and this includes where to find the animals to hunt, but also which gods to propitiate in order to make the hunt successful, which plants are edible, which are poisonous, and also what rituals you should use in order to accomplish your ends. And there's no distinction there between science and religion. It's all just what everybody, this is the lore that they pass on. But then something happens, and people make claims which then turn out to be false. Uh-oh, now what? At this point, we see the main distinction because the scientific move is a really unnatural act. It is saying, oops, I was wrong. Whereas there's a very natural tendency to say, well, actually, let me interpret what I was saying a little differently. And now we're on the road to the evasive, evanescent, ever-fleeting doctrines of religion where, in effect, those who put them forward can never be shown wrong. And I think it's this idea that religious doctrine is immune to disconfirmation, and hence, of course, immune to confirmation, that there's a faith here that is not apologetically immune, but triumphantly immune to confirmation or disconfirmation. That creates a truly fundamental divide. Science is in the business. Science is, in the largest sense, German Wissenschaft. It's the technology of knowledge. It's the technology of truth. It's not settling for things unless you can pretty well establish truth or falsity about them. And religion started out proclaiming the truth. And, of course, many religions still do. Where they do, there is a huge conflict. Now, late Stephen Jay Gould, in his book Rocks of Ages, promoted a very ecumenical idea of the two non-overlapping magisteria. Science does the facts, religion does the values. I don't think anybody bought that. Certainly, I, as a philosopher, would never cede to religion authority with regard to values. I mean, there's Gould, he's at Harvard, where you have John Rawls and Amartya Sen and Bob Nozick, some of the great secular ethicists of the age, and he's saying, no, ethics and morality is a matter for religion. Heavens no, it just isn't, and it never really has been. So what he was prepared to give religion was not religions to have, but of course he also took away from them all factual claims, and very few believers are prepared to abandon all claims to truth, to knowledge. And so I think it was a nice try, but it was hopeless.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And I think that sets the stage for going into these broader questions that I want each one of you to address. But let me continue with Dr. Dennett and ask, you're leading right up to why scientists should be interested in analyzing religion. And you deal with that, certainly in Breaking the Spell. And I wonder if you would address that now.
I think religion is one of the most important sets of phenomena in the world. All the decisions that we have to make in the 21st century about all the major problems, every one of them has a sort of religious dimension. If we get the religion side wrong, if we don't understand how this is going to impact religion, how religions are going to respond to this, if we don't understand that aspect of the natural world we live in, we're going to blow it. We're going to make bad decisions. Good intentions are not enough. Religion should be studied with the same dispassionate intensity that global warming and energy and fresh water and economies and political institutions and the pharmaceutical industry. These are all very important phenomena, and they deserve intense scientific investigation. We need to get clear about how religions are designed, what makes them tick, what happens if you perturb them in various ways, why some religions go off the rails, why other religions don't, why some religions fission at the drop of a hat and others are quite don't have offspring. These are all important questions, and we should study them so that we can make good decisions.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Wilson, how would you respond to that?
I think that when we draw the line between science and non-science, that line is not a religion, because there's all sorts of non-scientific beliefs which also depart from factual reality. What we really want to know about is, why do we believe things for which there is not factual evidence? Why do we believe things quite aggressively and defend them? And the answer to that is actually fairly simple, especially from an evolutionary perspective. We believe things when they're useful, not when they're true. And so what we need to do is we need to examine the trade-off between the usefulness of a belief and its factual content. And when we do that, not only do we have a theory of religion, but we have a theory of ideologies and all sorts of belief systems which depart from factual reality without necessarily invoking the gods. So I think that it's very important for me not to encapsulate religion. And I liked everything that Dan said in terms of science versus non-science, but I just think it makes religion so much more interesting when in the non-science category we include religion plus patriotic histories of nations, plus many ideologies, plus a lot of stuff that passes for science, because science can be an excellent mantle for ideologies. I'm sure anyone who has experience with science will know. So I think, to me, the science, non-science, the beliefs that are validated and they really correspond to what's out there. and then everything else, of which religion is one kind. I think that is a wonderful move to make.
Dr. Hott, on this, would you talk about
Your
this?
question was, should scientists be interested in talking about or explaining religion?
Yes, I mean, and this, the approach to, of looking at religion as a sort of, does it
As a
stand up to
natural
factual?
phenomenon. Yes, and I was thinking Charles Darwin one time wrote to a friend of his, Joseph Hooker, that it would be the better part of wisdom for men of science, as he put it, not to tackle this subject of religion at all. I can see my two colleagues don't agree with that, and I don't agree with it either. In fact, I think everything in natural history, and certainly religion is part of natural history, is grist for the scientific mill. And we should try as far as possible to explain things naturally. In fact, some of the best medieval philosophers and theologians themselves urged natural philosophers to push naturalistic explanations as far as you possibly can, so that theology will never be seen as somehow contradicting or competing with scientific explanations. So as part of natural history, like other living phenomena, religion should be studied by all the sciences. We've learned a lot about religion through the social sciences, psychology, history, and sociology, and archaeology, anthropology, and so forth. So it took a long time for evolutionary biologists to get up the steam to say, well, we're going to talk about this too. But I think it's a good thing, and I frankly think, since from the point of view of biology, I'm as neo-Darwinian as anybody else is, I think it's very important to study religion naturalistically. What I have a problem with, I don't know how the audience feels about this, is that once you have an assumption, or make the assumption, that since we now have a biological explanation for religion, once you make that assumption, does that mean that theological explanations of religion are thereby rendered superfluous? I can't go into it in great detail, but what I would propose as an alternative is what I would call layered explanation. And just to give an example of what I mean, suppose a fire is burning in your backyard and your neighbor comes over and says, explain to me why the fire is burning. Well, one answer you could give, well, the carbon in the wood is turning into carbon dioxide and other gases and giving off heat and so forth, and you could spend a whole career at that level. Or you could also say it's burning because I want to roast some hot dogs. Or you could say, in a more ultimate sense, the fire's burning because I want to have a picnic. Now, the point I want to make with this simple analogy is that there is no conflict at all between or among those three explanations. In other words, you don't say it's burning because of chemistry of combustion rather than because I'm having a picnic, or vice versa. So when it comes to talking about religion, why not try to explain it at different levels? What would rule that out logically? You could say, for example, that in religion, genes are getting passed off into the next generation. Religions are functional and adaptive at that level. But you could also say, and this would still be on a naturalistic plane, that people do religion because they need pattern and meaning, which is quite different from an evolutionary explanation. Or, without contradicting those two levels, it seems to me it's perfectly okay to say, at least in principle, that we do religion because we are born with a capacity for the infinite. St. Augustine talked about capax infinity. Each one of us has this restless desire for the infinite. If you want empirical evidence, it's called shopping. You know? So we have this. So couldn't we say that we do religion because we are being grasped by the infinite? And in saying that, we are not in any way denying evolutionary and other natural explanations for religion. Let's have all three. Let's not place them in unnecessary conflict with each other.
What I hear you saying then is that there are overlapping explanations in that way. We may not have overlapping magisteria, but overlapping explanations. I want to give Dr. Dennett the last word on this particular question, if you'd like to respond.
Well, I think that everything you've said is potentially consistent with what scientists find out. Let's find out. Are we born with an appetite for infinity? Or I'm not sure if that was quite your phrase, but maybe we are, or maybe it's culturally imbued. And if so, then we want to know why. And are we different from other animals in having this taste for the infinite? Is this something that all human beings have? And if so, why is this particular feature of human psychology playing this role? This is a possible explanation. I think it has to compete with many other possible explanations, which are also scientific, but they are at the level that you're talking about. They're at the level of people's beliefs and desires, at what I call the intentional stance, and you do have to characterize the content of these beliefs in order to make sense of them. Certainly, you're not going to talk about the chemical composition of the people. You're going to talk about the contents of their beliefs. But that's just as subject to scientific evaluation and analysis and explanation. So it's not clear to me yet that there are any specifically theological explanations of anything that don't have to be in the court of science and win that contest.
Okay. I'd like to move on simply because there's a very interesting question that is out there in the work of Dr. Wilson, and that is, given the prevalence of religions in the world now, is there some sort of advantage, natural advantage, to being religious that you have been able to look at and examine?
Well, in the taxonomy of conceptions of religion that I gave earlier, there are those which are adaptive explanations and those which are not. And amongst the scholars studying this, including evolutionists studying this, there's still a fair amount of disagreement as to whether religion counts as a byproduct, for example, of traits that evolve for things that have nothing to do with religion, and whether it is good for anything at all. And I'll give you one example of a byproduct explanation, not due to a sociologist, Rodney Stark, not an evolutionist, but his theory of religion is that it's inspired by economic theory, so it's Homo economicus. We're real good at forming explanations, cost benefits, stuff like that, gets us lots of stuff. But then there's things we don't have and can't have, like rain during a drought and or everlasting life. That doesn't stop it from wanting it. And so what religion is the invention of the gods with whom we bargain for that which we can't have. It is the economic mind spinning its wheels. You know, if only we could turn off our economic mind, then we wouldn't have any need for the gods. And we don't pray to God to convey us to work in the morning, but we do pray to God for everlasting life. And so according to that hypothesis, you could study religion all you want, and you will not find practical benefits associated with religion, okay? So there's a byproduct theory of religion. I think that the evidence is very, very strong at this point, that not only is religion useful, but it is useful for the community of religious believers. And this is essentially the opinion that Durkheim had. It's taken 100 years for us to come back to the position that Durkheim had, that we are a symbolic species, that we are, and this is taking culture seriously from an evolutionary perspective, means that we do not get most of our behaviors directly from our genes. We get them from our cultures. And what's culture but a meaning system? And I think that when John talked about, the search for the infinite, the restless aspect of human nature can be exactly right, because we're in the business of constructing meaning systems. And it's from meaning systems that organizes our perception and basically tells us what to do. So when you think of all of the different meaning systems that are possible, an infinite variety of meaning systems at the production end, that's not true at the survival end. There's a winnowing process for cultural systems, just as there is for biological systems. And what you end up with are cultural systems that are well adapted to their environments. And just to give you an example, to keep this short, I've done some work with my former graduate student Ingrid Storm, comparing liberal versus conservative Protestant denominations, okay? So what's the difference between a Seventh-day Adventist and a Unitarian? It's a big difference. And this is like installing different software in your heads and causing you to do very, very different things. And one nice thing about that is that, of course, conservatism and liberalism exist in both religious and non-religious versions, right?
Absolutely.
And I think when we look at how liberals and conservatives are dumbfounded by each other, now we begin to see, and that's a difference that's actually probably larger than many religious differences. And so now you begin to think of cultural diversity in general as like biological diversity. We know that ecosystems have many species because there's so many different ways to survive and reproduce. Now start thinking of cultural diversity that way. And not just religious cultural diversity, but all forms of cultural diversity. That is a functional approach to, it's functional plus more. I mean, part of evolution is historical, right? So species might be different purely because they have different histories with all sorts of path dependence, and you can't get there from here, and all the complexity that's associated with the non-adaptive side, the historical phylogenetic side of biological evolution also applies to cultural evolution. So think of cultural diversity as like biological diversity. Think of us as like a ecosystem.
And if one does, and one does see an advantage then to certainly having some sort of cultural meaning within one's life, this cultural diversity is something that expands, say in the United States. It continually expands. And is that something that science can account for in this way?
Well, I mean, culture is a very fast-moving process. It can be. And well, actually, this is very interesting. Do you know that genetic evolution can be both fast and slow? And one of the most exciting developments in evolution is how fast genetic evolution can be. There's a book called The 10,000-Year Explosion, which is telling us that actually genetic evolution is happening faster and faster, not slower. It's not just a process that stopped a long time ago. And cultural evolution can be slow. Do you know, if you know the great book by Robert Putnam, Making Democracy Work, that the cultural differences between southern and northern Italy you can trace them back 1,000 years because things get entrenched and they're very difficult to change. But cultural evolution, of course, can be very fast. So if you can look at religious change in America, for example, there's a new book out called One Nation Under Four Gods, which is, if you do a sociological survey of conceptions of God in America, that there's like four main ones. There's a vengeful God, there's a mystical God, there's a forgiving God, there's God your life coach. And this is all changing very, very, very fast.
One could say perhaps that Jefferson and Madison were conscious of this when they referred to religions as opinions and as sort of a foundation of religious liberty. But what would you say, Dr. Hott, to this?
Well, the question of whether religion has a natural advantage or gives us a natural advantage comes down to, it seems to me, whether it's adaptive. And we've talked about religion in a socio-cultural sort of sense so far, but I want to get down there in the fishbowl with the fish and ask, what's going on within an individual's life. And I want to bring a point up that's not, as far as I've been able to tell, usually talked about by evolutionary studies of religion. And that's the fact, as every religious person who's lived within a religious tradition for a long period of time can tell you, there are stages of development in a person's religious life. And some of these stages would be adaptive in a different way from others, if they're adaptive at all. So I think the discussion has to be more nuanced in terms of what's going on in the life of the individual. For example, at an early stage of an individual's religious development, perhaps the motivation to be religious as well as to be moral is governed by the desire to avoid punishment and to seek rewards. And perhaps we never completely let go of that phase of our religious development. At a later phase, it's not so much punishment and reward as the need to belong to a social group and to experience that sense of belongingness, which is so fundamental to our species as well as other primate species. But occasionally a person, maybe rarely, but maybe more than we think is true, will go beyond both of those stages and will reach a point in his or her religious development where punishment and reward has absolutely nothing to do with their religious life, nor does the need to belong so much as the need to be carried away into this ultimate dimension that I mentioned earlier. I think, for example, of Jesus' statement that my bread, my meat, is to do the will of my Father, in other words, to conform his life so fully to what he considered to be ultimate reality that it takes precedence over anything else, and it can even make you very non-adaptive, as we see in his case. So you could still make social arguments from kin selection and inclusive fitness and so forth, that that's not a violation of the evolutionary principles. But you wonder after a while, in light of what I said earlier about different layers of explanation, just how illuminating evolutionary explanations of religion are. I'm not denying that they're not, but I'm still looking to see just how illuminating are they. I mean, I can ask a physicist, for example, why was it so beautiful, the weather in New York yesterday and today? And the physicist would answer, well, it's ultimately the laws of thermodynamics. If I come back in December and ask, why is it so cold and rainy and miserable? And ask the same man or woman physicist, why is it like this? You get the same answer, thermodynamics. So if adaptation or natural selection is always going to be the answer to every question we have about why do we do religion, why is this group religious, why is that group religious, then I have to wonder just how illuminating evolutionary understandings of religion are. I'm not denying that they aren't, but I think we have to relativize them and place them in the context of a plurality of levels of understanding religion and not get carried away with them.
Now you put forward quite an interesting little hypothesis at the beginning of that statement about the different stages and how one moves through these stages. I wonder if you're right. The fact is, that's a thesis that can be studied empirically. It's not evolutionary biology. It's social psychology, it's sociology, it's and so forth. That's just as much part of science. Don't forget, we're not just talking about genes. We're not talking about thermodynamics. We're talking about science at large, and that includes all the social sciences too.
Well, again, I want to push scientific explanations as far as possible, including evolutionary explanations. But I don't think that, once we decide that something is functional, therefore its claims are untrue. A friend of mine, Holmes Ralston, calls this the if functional, therefore untrue fallacy. And I think there's a lot of that going on in evolutionary accounts of religion. Most of or at least many of the evolutionists who are studying religion start out with the premise, well, since God does not exist, we have to find a purely natural explanation, an exclusively natural explanation of religion. Again, methodologically speaking, I don't have any objection to naturalistic understandings of religious faith. But the jump from methodological to metaphysical exemption of thought from this religious way of doing things is, to me, something that's problematic.
I think in some ways that your last statements do open the door for a very blunt question that has got to sort of be put out here, and that is why and how do religions exist after Darwin? Which is, I think, something that many people do wonder.
Okay. Well, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. Let's ask whether they should exist after Darwin. I think the biggest reason why people have problems religiously, theologically with the Darwinian picture of things is that it has three ingredients that don't correspond exactly to the ones you mentioned earlier, which are problematic to those who think of God primarily as a designer. And those ingredients are there have to be lots of accidents, plus natural selection, plus lots and lots of time. And to people who believe in divine providence, the Darwinian recipe, at least at first, seems to be very, very problematic. because they're accidents not only in the origin of life, but accidents in the variations and mutations that provide the raw material for evolution. Accidents in natural history, such as the asteroid that impacted the Yucatan Peninsula, wiping out the dinosaurs, apparently making room for mammalian development, then primates, and then eventually us. Why, if there is a providential deity in charge of things, is there so much undirected happening in the cosmos? Why isn't there more evidence, would be the question that scientists would ask, of a designer, as it were. And then there's natural selection, which operates so impersonally and mechanistically and apparently unjustly and unfairly. Very difficult to reconcile for a lot of people with a benign providence. Certainly it was true of Darwin himself, and it's been true of countless people since then. And the vast amount of time that it takes for evolution to unfold. If God were truly interested in bringing about life and consciousness, why fool around for all these billions of years before this happened? So you have at least prima facie in the Darwinian recipe for life something that seems to be an obstacle to faith. But my problem has always been, since this whole debate, especially in our own country, between those who accept intelligent design and those who are atheistic evolutionists on the other extreme, and all the positions in between, has been that we've been so fixated on design that we've forgotten about something much more fundamental going on, and that's drama. So what theology after Darwin does is switch the focus from this, I think, rather superficial question of whether design points to deity to the question of whether the drama of life, which is stitched into the drama of the whole universe, whether it's capable of carrying a meaning. And that's the fundamental theological question. Is life meaningful? And is the universe purposeful? Religions stand or fall on that question. But what we've discovered in modern times, first with geology, then with biology, and in the 20th century with cosmology, and this is, to me, is the greatest discovery of modern science. We've discovered that the universe is a story. It's not a collection of things suspended there in space. It's a narrative. And a narrative is capable of carrying a meaning, but you have to remember, we might be very, very early in that narrative unfolding. And we need patience, and this is where religion comes in. Those who wait for the Lord will not be put to shame. Waiting is an indispensable aspect of genuine faith. That would correspond to that third stage that I was talking about a while ago. So if the narrative is just starting, then we live in an unfinished universe. And it would be brash, and I think a little bit bold on the part of anyone to say this universe lacks meaning, because we have to let the story unfold. All of us have attended plays and dramas where in the early acts we wonder, whether anything meaningful is going to come of this. But if you wait, sometimes you find that the later acts of the drama stitch together into a coherence that was unanticipated earlier, the elements that were out of whack and unintelligible. I think we have to approach the universe that way. Coherence shows up not by looking back to the past, because things fall apart the further you go back into the past, into molecules and atoms. It's only by looking toward the future that we can expect coherence to show up. And that essentially is the biblical attitude. And in that sense, and a lot of others that I can't go into now, I think biblical faith, with its notion of promise and an openness of the future, is quite able to accommodate the data, the information that is tributary to evolutionary theory.
Let me just ask, does biology, Dr. Wilson, allow for that kind of a narrative then?
I think that science, by definition, does not provide meaning in the sense that religion does, because science merely tells you what's out there. And what a religion needs to do, or what a full-fledged meaning system needs to do, is to tell people what to do, how to act in the real world. And so I think for science to be part of a meaning system, then the values have to come from someplace. So values have to consult facts in order to lead to what to do. I think what's historically unique is that in the past, meaning systems have blended values and facts. Because values masquerading as facts are very important. If I want you to do something, a putative fact is extremely... If I want women to stay in the home, then to say that they're mentally inferior really works well. And so I think the reason that we're so awash in falsehoods, both inside religion and outside of religion, is because these falsehoods are doing useful work. Putative facts are doing useful work in telling us what to do. Now, for the first time, what we need to have a meaning system which respects the facts more than ever before. We need to have a body of knowledge which we are vigilant about respecting. And then we need to be explicit about our values in order so that we can consult the facts. And so we need a value-fact separation in modern life, which has never before existed in the past. And whether that value system is a religious value system, for example, whether the value system needs to invoke supernatural agents to pick a superficial definition of religion, I don't know. I personally hope no. I hope my value system is one which is a fully secular value system, but I could be wrong. I do think it's important, though, to make the distinction between science as something which establishes a body of facts and is therefore, I think this is important to say, is incomplete as a meaning system. If we only have the facts, then we couldn't even take the first step when we get out of bed in the morning. So we need values. Those values have to come from someplace. We should be very explicit about those too, and we should have a discussion of values. Should be part of what we do.
Dr. Dennett, how would a value system be informed and anchored in the facts?
I think that's such an obvious, the answer to that question is so obvious. Good intentions aren't enough. You have to know what the circumstances are. You have to know what the likely outcomes are going to be, and you have to know what matters to people. Then, only once you have that factual information can you even begin to make a responsible, morally responsible choice. I think that our values come and always have come, in spite of what many religions have said, from the ongoing community activity of criticism and mutual persuasion. We're not living with Old Testament morality now. We're not living even with New Testament morality. We've gone beyond that, and there's consensus on a lot of things, where the religions have actually not been leading, but been actually regressive and slow to catch up. But I want to return to the blunt question you asked, because right now we have H1N1 virus, we have HIV, and these are evolving at a great rate. Evolving. Natural selection mattering in our lives right now. And I want to ask Professor Hott, if he says he's a good neo-Darwinian. I don't blame the creationists, the people who are intelligent design believers who got it from their pastors. Their pastors have told them that intelligent design is good science and that Darwin is wrong. And I want to know if you think that's morally excusable because they're pastors. It seems to me that is inexcusable spreading of ignorance, and we should hold the pastors responsible. And I wonder what you think about that.
You're the moderator. I don't know whether you wanted us to get into a debate or not.
I think you have to respond to that, of course. But I don't expect anybody here to defend creation science, of course. I mean, but it is out there, and it does come into the last question.
No, my question was, since we're nobody here will defend creation science or intelligent design. But now the question is, do we forgive those religionists who make it a major campaign, a crusade, to spread that nonsense?
Well, listen, I do want to come back to that in the context of the media, but please do go ahead and
well, as I listen to Dan, what strikes me as so ironic is what a passionate moral sense he has, a sense of rightness. And a sense, I would say, of being grasped by rightness. Earlier, what I referred to as religion is essentially that. I defined religion as the awareness of being grasped by something which is of ultimate significance and ultimate importance. And not only that, but it has a kind of everlastingness, an independence about it judges you. You are judged by that sense of rightness that you have. So that's essentially what I mean by faith. Faith is the state of being grasped by something of ultimate importance. For example, I've read a lot of your books, and even though I don't agree with a lot of what you say, I still see a mind passionately looking for truth, a mind that believes that truth is worth seeking. It's that sort of thing that I mean religion at its best is that. That's the kind of examples, unfortunately, that you use, and that many evolutionists use when they discuss religion, is the kind of religion that most of us theologians have problems with as well. Creationism, intelligent design. We see all of that as quite deficient. Not only bad science, but horrible theology as well. So it bothers me that you keep holding up to as a paradigm, as the paradigmatic examples of science or of religion or of morality, what most theologians take to be, take just as critically as you do. Now, I know your answer is, well, you're just a theologian. I'm talking to most of the people. I've heard you say this. But you don't seem to be aware of how much theology has shaped popular religion over the ages. Who shaped Christianity? After St. Paul, the most important shaper of it was a theologian, Augustine. And today, theologians are not completely irrelevant to the shaping of Christian faith. And aside from the fundamentalist churches that you're talking about, most of the pastors in mainline Christian churches have been influenced by theologians like Karl Barth, Paul Tillich, and others, who themselves have been even much more critical of intelligent design and creationism than evolutionists have. So I'm hoping that we could bring the discussion to, I guess, a higher level in terms of having you converse with theology and not just with what we would consider to be twisted and often perverted forms of religiosity. So yeah, I would agree with you. We should ask for forgiveness, if that's what we're saying.
You know, one thing here, and this is the privilege of all of us, is that we're in the presence of a very high-flown, nuanced, intelligent conversation that's going on here among people who have studied deeply their subjects and thought about the subjects of each other. And that is a rarity. It's a rarity in American life and American discourse these days. One of the things that confronts us when religion and science come into play in some sort of pairing is, can there be a way of communicating some of the points and the research that you all have? Or is the dialogue going to be lost? Is it going to be simply sort of confined to two really distant extremes? And referring to, yes, you're absolutely right, Dr. Dennett, no one within miles, I think, would defend creation science, and yet creation science is what gets written about so often, because they do have the creation scientists access to microphones and the intelligent designers who succeeded them. And it does create, in some ways, a perverted picture, a distorted picture of what's going on. What is the way around that?
Good question, and I think it has an answer. It has a good answer, and one which you might not expect. And it's where an ecological approach to religions really comes in handy. There's a wonderful book called Sacred and Secular by Ronald Inglehart and Pippa Norris. They're good social scientists. They don't use the E word. But their thesis is, in fact, extremely evolutionary, which is that fundamentalism has a home. It has an environment in which it is well adapted, and that environment is one of existential insecurity. So if you compare places of the world like Scandinavia, for example, which are existentially very secure, with places like the Middle East, which are existentially very insecure, it should not be a puzzle to us why liberalism and why the enlightened forms, we would call enlightened forms of religion, thrives in Scandinavia, whereas fundamentalism thrives in the Middle East. Because if your life is so existentially insecure, guess what? Your little wimpy mainline liberal religion is not going to do you very well. Whereas a strong religion, as a fundamentalist would put it, is going to do you much better. And so if we want to eradicate fundamentalism, there's actually one way and only one way to do it: make the world more existentially secure. But if you actually puzzle about how irrational those folks are and you take it out of ecological context, forget about it. You're not going to get rid of it, no matter how mindless it seems to you. So I think it's very important to understand why cultures exist. They exist because they are adapting the people to those environments. And so that means if you don't like some aspect of a culture, and indeed there's much not to like, you just don't think about changing the culture, think about changing the environment. And when you do that, then you can get what you want for free. So I think that that's an extremely important point to make.
The environment would have to be changed through education, though, would it not?
Not necessarily.
Education is a large part of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think right now that the step that would make the most dramatic difference the quickest is if we could somehow arrange for women in Islam to be educated universally. I think that in itself would be a major, major change. I think I agree entirely with David that if you look at basic security issues, socioeconomic issues, and just the goodness of life, you find that where life is dire, that's where fundamentalism flourishes, and for just the reasons that he said. So I also agree with him that the way to change that is not to hoot at fundamentalists, because they aren't going to listen. And besides, well, that's just a waste of your energy. What you want to do is make the world better where they are, and their fundamentalism will no longer be as attractive.
Well, just a point that President Obama, when he was in Cairo, did make the education of women front and center, part of one of the things that he called for. I want to ask Dr. Hott, excuse me, when we talk about fundamentalism here, are we talking about one particular thing?
Well, the part of fundamentalism that I would focus on from an intellectual point of view is the way in which it interprets its scriptures, and we usually refer to that as literalistic. And I think that's, I agree with what David said, there's a social dimension we have to take into account too, but I agree with Dan also that there's an intellectual dimension to this discussion. I think of Alfred North Whitehead, who back in the early 20s said that science and religion are the two most important forces that shape culture and civilization, and that the very future of civilization depends upon science and religion getting along with one another. But one of the obstacles to that, of course, is literalism. The other obstacle on the part of the intellectual world is what I would call scientism, which I think is not far removed from a kind of fundamentalism and literalism too. So there's fundamentalism at different levels. And we all have a tendency, because of our longing for certitude, we have a tendency, a temptation. One of the great temptations of intellectual life as well as of religion is towards certitude, and certitude here and now. And one way to get that is to look for scriptural certitude, or certitude by belonging to an intellectual community in which scientific evidence seems to be the criterion of all kinds of truth. Well, if we're going to get science and religion together, we have to get beyond both kinds of literalism. It's not too hard to get beyond scientism from an intellectual point of view. Scientism says take nothing on faith, but yet it takes faith to embrace scientism. Therefore, scientism should not be taken. So if we just reflect upon scientism itself, I think we can find it's a self-subverting sort of worldview that leads in turn to another worldview called scientific naturalism, which is the view that nature, insofar as it is available to science itself, is all there is. You've bounded your sense of reality by a kind of certitude, which is, in my view, and maybe I'm being tendentious in using this term, not completely distinct from the kind of fundamentalism, obsession with certitude that you find in religious community too. There we have to get beyond literalism, and that's going to be a very, very difficult thing to do. I mean, I could give you some suggestions. We could go back, for example, to Galileo, and point out that Galileo, in his famous letter to the Grand Duchess Christina, says that we should not be looking for scientific information in Scripture. And that is the source of so much mischief, especially in our country. And this whole thing called the Darwin Wars is fueled on the side of religion by an implicit sense, an ironic, anachronistic sense, that somehow the Bible, especially Genesis, is trying to teach us the true science. And that comes into conflict with Darwinian science and so forth. So how do you get beyond that? Religions have struggled with this. The Catholic Church came to grips with it formally in an encyclical by Leo XIII, who was a very conservative pope, in 1893, not too long after Darwin. And there he instructed Catholics, do not look for scientific information in the Scriptures. That will prevent a lot of the kind of literalism that's causing so much unnecessary conflict between, especially evolution or Darwin on the one hand and religious communities on the other. So get beyond literalism is the big issue, and it's not going to be easy to do.
One of the conditions, it seems to me, is if one is going to move beyond into this productive conversation, is somehow diffusing the element of fear. And in essays that I've read, quite a few scientists were terribly shaken, I think, by events in Kansas with the attempt to impose an intelligent design requirement in the curriculum, and then in Dover, Pennsylvania, too. And there was a sense that science was under attack by politicians who were responding to certain constituencies. At the same time, you don't have a shortage of people who would claim to be religious in one sense or another who feel that they're under attack, too. But how does one go about diffusing this? Is there a way to do that, in that way, further the discussion? Dr.
Well, first of all, I want to just comment on the term scientism.
Please.
I listened very carefully to what you said about scientism, and I don't know anybody who's guilty of it. It seems to me that scientism has been invented as a sort of straw man or straw person, so that anytime anybody gets angry or anxious about science sticking its nose in something where they think science has no business sticking its nose, they get to say reductionism, scientism, and these are epithets that are supposed to freeze everybody in their tracks. Oh my gosh, it's scientism again. Nonsense. I don't think I know any scientists that are really guilty of the sort of caricature scientism that you're describing. I do know scientists who, like me, are naturalists. We're methodological naturalists. But that's just built right into the scientific method and the whole approach. That's not saying that there couldn't be supernatural things, but the burden of proof is on somebody who wants to invoke them. That's methodological naturalism. We're not going to let any scientist say, well, my experiment depends on a supernatural element, and if you don't believe in it, then you're not going to get the experiment. No, that's just, we don't permit that. That's just completely out of bounds. That's naturalism. So I think that comparing the fundamentalist literalist with this imaginary scientism is, I don't recognize this. I don't accept that that's a legitimate comparison. I do think that there certainly are times when individual scientists and spokespeople for science speak with undue harshness and undue even disrespect about the follies of people who don't know their science. and I'm sure we could be more diplomatic. But I think it still is, I think we've had a lot of diplomacy for a long time. I think the time has come to say to people who say, hey, look, I'm entitled to my opinion, and I think that intelligent design is good science, we have to say, well, no, you're not actually really entitled to that opinion. No, the very idea that we're entitled to our opinions, if you examine it closely, doesn't make any sense.
I think that we are on such an important and hot topic right now. This question, this word scientism, which is out there and has been both defined and refuted. I'd like to give Dr. Wilson and Dr. Hott a chance to respond to that, please.
I want to make 2 points. One is that science does involve rejecting ideas. And if any idea is worth rejecting over a period of centuries, it is what I would call the intervening God hypothesis. Whenever there's a hypothesis, perfectly good scientific hypothesis, that a supernatural agent interfered in the affairs of people, then that has failed again and again and again. And so there's every reason to reject the intervening God hypothesis, and that includes creationism in schools and so on. Actually, if you were to thoroughly reject the intervening God hypothesis, I think that would be quite shocking in terms of the Catholic Church doesn't even remotely do that. So I think that there's subtle forms of that which, if you really scrutinized it, then that would be a lot of work would be done. But the second point I want to make is that, and I'm eager to see how this plays with Dan here, is that I actually think you can get a lot of mileage out of thinking of religion, of science, as a religion that worships truth as its God, in which actually science is just like a religion, but its God is the truth. And that organizes the sacred, plenty of faith, and this whole system. The only difference, to be provocative, I'll say, between science as a cultural system that is designed to hold people accountable for what they say about the world, okay, is that is its God. And in every other respect, it has all the trappings of religion, and should. It could learn from religion. It could be stronger by having some of those trappings of religion.
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. No one has mentioned tonight the name of Richard Dawkins, but
he did indirectly.
Okay.
I was going to just now.
Yeah, but I just saw a very brief clip, a wonderful interview of Richard Dawkins, Dr. Dawkins from Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. He said, "Is there anything other than scientific truth?" A rhetorical question, meaning, of course, no. Anyway, Dr. Hott,
that's
please.
scientism, as I would define it. And Dan has sponsored Richard Dawkins' work, probably as much as anyone else has. And recently, Richard said that it may be that humanity will never completely reach the goal of complete understanding. But I venture that if it does, it will be science, not religion, that leads us there. And then he says, if that be scientism, then all the better for scientism. So it's not as though the word is not being used and embraced. I mean, he's explicitly embracing it as his perspective. And I think it's very honest of him to do so, because it's only if we be honest about what our beliefs are can we begin a real conversation.
We are so close to the end of our time, and I don't want to by any means cut us off, because I think what's very important now is to derive, particularly for the audience, but for the rest of us, some sense of where we go from here. And so I'd like you to recommend, in the name of good communication, of going beyond fear and feeling threatened in one way or another by people out there who might be described as fundamentalists or others. What should we be reading now? And feel free to name your own books. Dr. Wilson, please.
Well, I think that I think that evolution is the theory of choice for the study of religion. And I and my colleagues have been working to do this. And one of the things we've done is we've created a website as a kind of a source to go for everyone who wants to read about this. And so if you simply type in evolutionary religious studies into Google, you will get to a wonderful website with a beginner's guide and a directory of people working in this field and all sorts of papers and resources. And you can read about how all scholars, anyone who wants to understand religion from a scholarly perspective, can see why evolutionary theory is the framework of choice for all things human, therefore also religion. And then also I'd recommend a book by my colleague Michael Dowd called Thank God for Evolution. And Michael Dowd is a evangelical who has been born yet again as an evolutionist, but still regards himself as an evangelical. And he's an itinerant traveling preacher with his atheist wife. I'm telling you, life is stranger than fiction. They go around in a van with a Darwin fish kissing a Christian fish and big hearts coming up, and go to Thank God for Evolution on the website or on his book. And what you'll see is, he gets the science right. He passes science journalism standards for getting the science right, but also it has the fulfillment of that we associate with religion. He calls it day language and night language. And not everyone likes the evangelical style, but it's really something to see. And so there's my suggestion.
It's a great country, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Dr. Dennett.
Well, I'm not sure what I want to add to what David has just recommended. I think that a lot of people have been very critical of the straight talk that the four horsemen of the apocalypse, Harris, Hitchens, Dawkins, and I have engaged in. And I want to suggest that, in fact, the effects have been quite marvelous. That a lot of people have been so hyper-diplomatic for so long and have been so eager not to offend sensibilities or make anybody anxious by challenging their beliefs. And in fact, these books have had great success, all of them. And some of them, mine is the mildest, the most diplomatic of them.
Breaking the spell.
Breaking the spell.
Yes.
But they've all, in fact, if you have read, and you surely have if you've read any reviews, how terribly harsh and rude those books are, read them and you'll be surprised to find they are very forthright. But they are not ad hominem. They are not, in fact, well, they are rude only in this sense. If you think about it, there's just no polite way to say, excuse me, sir or madam, but have you considered the possibility that you've wasted your life on a delusion? But sometimes that has to be said.
There's nothing like bluntness. What is of the four horsemen and their various books, which have enjoyed great success, they've also produced some very, very intelligent, thoughtful counter literature, such as Dr. Hott. You wrote a response to what is called the New Atheism.
Yes, I won't advertise that book, but I want to advertise some ways of thinking about science and religion and faith that have been deeply formative in my life. I mentioned the philosopher and mathematician Alfred North Whitehead a while ago. I think one of the most important books I've ever read, and I used to use it every year in my course on science and religion at Georgetown, is Science and the Modern World. Because in that book, I think he says, in a sense, excuse me, gentlemen and women and my audience, but you have been led astray since the 17th century by an unintelligible view of matter, which has consumed and taken over the whole horizon of intellectual discussion. And in that book, he teaches you to love science. And I don't want anything I said tonight to give you the impression that I don't love science. I deeply love science. But I have real problems with taking science captive in ideologies such as scientific materialism, which is a term that Whitehead uses throughout the book, and does, I think, a marvelous logical critique of its fundamental incoherence. And in that book, he also takes religion to task. He says that the death of religion comes with the suppression of the high hope of adventure. And he says until religion learns to discover the spirit of adventure in the same way that modern science has, the decay will continue. So both religion and science can learn an awful lot from each other, and that's a good book to start with.
I hope you all have been taking notes about this tonight. I think we've been extraordinarily privileged, and we should be extremely grateful, both for the City University of New York Graduate Center's staging of this wonderful event, and also for our three panelists for providing us with this, with a rare, insightful, nuanced, and intelligent discussion in such a contentious area. Thank you so much.